Hello, and welcome to today's Augustana Human Library session. The title of today's book is Who Are You Crying For? And this is the Human Books Abstract. From discovering where you come from as an adopted child to dealing with the life-changing situation of bilateral below-the-knee amputations. One man's experience in rolling with the punches. This is the story of how being a police officer enabled this person to deal with enormous life challenges and find the path forward.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. And I don't know who's all with us today, so welcome. And thank you for coming to hear my book. My name is Ward Steeney. I'm a former Calgary police officer, father of 3, no grandkids. I have a rather huge family. I have 4 brothers and sisters here in Calgary. I have 7 more out in Victoria in that area. And then I have 3 more out in Virginia, but I'll get to that part of the story. I guess my purpose here today is talk about how a positive attitude saved my life and got me through some interesting times. One of those things that happened to me is some background. I was adopted as a baby, and I was born in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. My parents came up from Prince Albert to pick me up, moved back to Prince Albert right away, and then when I was 8 years old, we moved to Calgary. So Calgary's been my home. Now, at the age of 5, my mom and dad made the decision, because everybody else in the neighborhood knew that I was in fact adopted. They made that decision to tell me at that age that I was adopted. So in essence, I've known all my life that I was adopted. And when my marriage ended in 2001, it became a very crumbling thing to me about things breaking down, walls breaking down, abandonment issues. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was in a great deal of hurt and pain. And so the first thing I did is I talked to my estranged wife, and I said, well, we're going to do couples counseling. And yep, okay, let's do that. So this was a Thursday, and so we had a couple sessions set up for the following Tuesday. And then I booked myself in for my own session the Tuesday, and then the Thursday was for me. Tuesday morning comes around, she phones and she says, you know what, there's nothing for me to save. I don't know if I love you. I don't know if I ever loved you. Click, that was it. And for me, that was my rock bottom. That was the thing that sent me to my lowest point. And I phoned, and I was about to cancel the session in the afternoon and said, instead, can I come in on myself? Yep, absolutely, no problem. So I went in that afternoon, and I don't mind telling you, I sat in that chair bawling for about 20 minutes and talking about my hurt. There was a black spot in my soul that I felt like it was going to just take over and end me. So we got into that conversation. 20 minutes into it, that therapist looked at me and said, who are you crying for? I said, well, my wife, because I miss him. He just shook his head. Who are you crying for? I said, well, my kids, because they. Nope. And he looked at me one final time, leaned forward, said, who are you crying for? And I said, well, my mom. And he goes, yeah. What do you need to do? I said, I need to go find my mom. And that's when my positive attitude kicked in again. Now, as a cop, we're trained to go in, and this is one thing I always stressed when I was training my rookies. It's how I was taught. You do one call at a time. You don't leave it to go for the flashy chase call or something else. You have the respect and compassion for the people you're dealing with, because you don't know how many times the police have been there. You have an idea. But you take one call and you do it very well. And so I began to focus on, how am I going to find my birth parents? So the next morning I get up, I'm supposed to go for lunch with my mom and dad. I phoned them the night before and said, there's something I'd like to meet you guys for lunch with. And I had my 3-year-old son, Kyle, with me. So that morning I phoned Saskatchewan Post Adoption Services, and they said, yes, we can do a search for you and look for your parents. Send us $350 and we'll get to it in about 18 months. And I kind of looked at the phone and went, it's like you don't know me at all. 18 months is not going to do it for me. I need to start now. That's how I work. And anyway, so I set that down and went to lunch with my parents. And I told my mom and dad, I said, you know what, I've come to that point in my life where I need to go find out who I am. And so my dad looked at me and he said, well, he goes, do you remember that over the years we've asked you, do you want to know who your parents are? And I said, yeah, I probably said something along the lines of, nope, I'm okay, everything's cool, it's all good. And he goes, yeah, that's exactly what your response was. And he says, to tell you the truth, we have some information for you. We know what your birth name was. And we also know that your mom was a teenager and that her dad was the town doctor in a place called Kyle, Saskatchewan. I looked at my son, Kyle, looked back at my parents, and they knew exactly why I looked. And they said, oh, we asked Karen, my wife, when Kyle was born, we asked her who picked the name. And she said it was you. And it was out of the blue the morning he was born. I said, yeah, it was. And so armed with that information, and I'll spare the details there, my mindset then was, let's go find out where I came from. And it took all sorts of twists and turns. I came up with some information that one of the sisters in this family, and I knew it was this family and it was one of the sisters, didn't know which one. But one of the sisters was married to a guy, but they divorced and he moved to Calgary. So I phoned that guy up. Wasn't him, but he knew him because he had the exact same name and they did their banking at the Bank of Nova Scotia in Calgary together. And every month their statements would get screwed up. So they'd meet for lunch to exchange bank statements. It's one of those things that just reinforces that rule. Everything happens at a time and place for a reason. You can't always question it. So armed with that information, he said, yeah, here's all the family names. And so I did a Google search, and not one police computer was used in the location of my family. It was all Google. Googled them and had a bunch of information. And one of the names that kept coming up was coming up in, and I'm leaving names out at this point because still not everybody knows about this. But anyway, one name kept coming up in race results. So, and by that I mean, like marathon races, that type of thing. And I kept getting these hits on this one name, and I thought, well, that doesn't do me any good. Until it dawned on me that that name kept bumping up in age categories. So I looked at the age categories and for when the bumps were occurring and realized that this guy was in the right age bracket to be my uncle. So now that we've got that, I figured, well, we'll take a stab at it. And my guy in Calgary said that he thought some of the children had ended up in BC. So one Saturday afternoon, I phoned up the gentleman and I said, hi. And again, positive attitude. We're not going to lose. We're going to keep doing this. And we're under 72 hours from when I started searching. Just that's always been a wild spot for me, as some people search for years, and I'm into hour 72 of my search on Saturday afternoon. And so I phoned him up and I said, hi, I'm looking for the Stark family of Kyle, Saskatchewan. And he said, after a long pause, he goes, what'd you say your name was? I said, my name's Ward Steeny. And he goes, yeah, that was my family. And I realized that I had forgotten to think about what I was going to do at this point. So he said, I'd been living my whole life without being able to feel my own stuff. That was one of the things I learned from the fallout of that afternoon of Who Are You Crying For? And so it was like I was living with a bunch of secrets. And I said, you know what? No more. I said, you are my uncle. I don't know which sister of yours is my mom, but she gave birth to me in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan in April of 1964. And I'm looking to find her. And as you can imagine, there's a long pause at the end of that information. And he said, I knew there was a family secret. He said, I don't know which sister it is, but I know which sister to ask. And he goes, I'm sorry, I'm just going out to photograph my wife's faculty thing for a UBC thing. He goes, let me get your number and I will call you back tomorrow if nothing else. And I said, thank you. That's all I can ask. Wow, what an impactful moment. And the thing about the journey for somebody who's been adopted is not the finding, but it's giving yourself permission to go look, to take those steps, to find out who you were, because that's a missing building block of your life. You don't know where you came from, who you are. You adopt the characteristics of your family, but there's things that are unexplained. Anyway, I go out and cut the grass, come back in, and I see on the telephone, way back when we used to have those separate contraptions, there's a light flash, or it just says one missed call, no message. So I look at the number, and sure enough, it's a BC number, but it wasn't the number I just called, and it was a different area code. I knew it was BC, it was on the island, whereas I talked to the mainland just a few short minutes ago. Anyway, I pressed the redial button because I figured it was time. And I get the very British voice on the other end of the phone going, good afternoon. Is that her name? And I said, hi, this is Ward Steeny. And she said to me, before you say anything, are you okay? Were you loved? And that was the end of my search. And that was also the beginning of reuniting with brothers and sisters I had never known. At that time, she says, so that summer I went out and met all the children that she had. They were all half brothers and sisters. My dad had and her did not end up together. So I had 7 on the coast with her. And she knew where my dad was, and she phoned him up. And he said, you know, don't contact me unless it's, a medical emergency, whatever. But I knew I had 3 more brothers and sisters out in Virginia. I met my family on his side in Saskatoon. So I've reunited, managed to meet and talk to everybody now and I had my mom and dad, once they adopted me, it apparently took the pressure off. I always remind them that I couldn't have been that bad a kid. And so I had 4 brothers and sisters here, 7, 3. So I've got 14 brothers and sisters, and I'm the oldest. And so that part has been interesting, rewarding, and very, very honored to be a part of all those lives. And so flash forward, life keeps going, and you take the hits and you roll with them. And I left the police department and went into counterterrorism and worked with different security entities, and ended up unemployed for a bit. And in 2007, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and had my blood sugars under control, but the diabetic neuropathy set in to my hands and my feet, and they were very painful, and that's fine. We found a way to deal through that. So now in January of last year, or January of 2019, at some point, I got an infection in both feet at the same time. And it went septic so fast, I didn't realize I was in pain or that I was sick. It got into my brain, and I have 2 weeks in January and February of 2019 that I don't remember. I remember January 30th going to the funeral of a friend, and then that evening going to a retirement function for a friend. I went home, I had a flat tire. I got AMA Roadside to come out and give me a hand. And that's the last thing I remember, until I remember waking up in an ambulance on the way to Foothills Hospital from Cochrane, where I was living. A friend of mine had found me. I had not been returning phone calls or messages to anybody. A friend of mine got pissed off, came looking for me, and found me in a fairly bad state. That evening when I was brought into the hospital was February 11th, 2019. And my family was told to prepare for the worst, that chances were not good, that I was going to make it through the night as a result of the infection. I remember being in the ambulance a little bit. I remember having really weird dreamlike episodes during the next little bit. Couldn't tell you what day I was at, where I was going. And I woke up on the 13th, and my right foot had been amputated to the ankle, and the dead tissue had been all removed off my left. So it had a bunch of exposed flesh, all bandaged up. That afternoon, the orthopedic surgeon came in to see me, and he said, well, here's the scenario. We can't save your right foot, and the infection's so bad, we're going to have to do a bilateral amputation, or an amputation up below the knee. He said, we could try to save your left leg. We don't think it's going to help. You'd be months and months, possibly years, in and out of surgery, removing dead tissue, exposed flesh. And he said, just your best bet for a normal life would be below knee bilateral amputations. And so I looked at them and I said, okay, let's do that. And my family, which was my 4 brothers and sisters, my mom and dad, my 3 kids, all looked at me. And the doctor left and they said, why did you just, like, how was that so easy for you? It wasn't even a take my time, come back type of decision. And I said, well, I said, he's the expert. He knows what he's doing. And so the following Monday, this would be in the family Monday, on February 18th, 2019, was the day I had my amputations. And then began the recovery. Now, they were excessively worried that I might get an infection, that something would happen with the amputations and there would be discharge or infections, or that they might have to amputate higher if that hadn't worked, if they hadn't got in front of the infections. But it worked. It healed up very nicely in 6 weeks. There was no problems. And on April 4th, I received my first pair of loaner legs from a company called Coleman Prosthetics, who I can't thank enough for standing by me and with me through this whole process. And so I started learning how to walk again. Now, having been an officer safety instructor and a police firearms instructor, training for me was a very scientific thing. I knew that one of the things we teach is that you teach very small incremental movements, and then you build on those to get to the goal of where you want to be. And it's very important to remember and realize and learn those little small pieces at the bottom, because as you build on them, the better you know the small pieces, the better you're going to be in the big picture at the top. And so that's how I approached my recovery and my rehab. First at Foothills Hospital, which was amazing, and they'd have me sit there without my legs on initially, learning all sorts of balance drills. And I was working with 3 extremely talented physiotherapists. And one day it was funny because they stopped and said, do you have any questions for us about what we're doing? And I said, well, or why we're doing it. Does it seem weird to you that we're doing it this way? And I said, you know what? I've never lost my legs before, so I've never been through rehabilitation and physical therapy. I said, I'm sitting here soaking in the training because I know that you are teaching me this for a reason. And this is where the positive mindset comes in, is I'm not worried about driving a car right now. I'm worried about balance in that room and reaching for the next little stone or the next little, it was not stones. They didn't throw stones at me. It was like little rubber balls and things. But that's my goal right now, is that little task, not the big task down the road. That's for later. And I said, you guys are the professionals. I'm not going to sit here and go, I think you're doing it wrong. Now, believe me, I saw in others people doing that in those rooms because they were upset about losing a limb, upset that this had happened to them. And one of the first things I said when they told me I was going to lose my legs was, well, I'm going to get some kick-ass prosthetics. No, not the springy ones like everybody thinks of, but regular legs with feet on them. And I got those April 4th. I was discharged from the hospital on April 30th and began the rehab from home with traveling in wheelchairs, using access to get down to the Sheldon Shoemere, where I did my rehab, and going from having to go in a wheelchair to moving up to a four-wheeled walker to a cane. And then, and that's when they discharged me. They said, look, the first time they put me on the stairs, I was able to do it. And they said, well, have you done stairs before? I said, nope. Did you practice at home? I said, nope. They said, well, how'd you do that? I said, well, I thought about, when I looked at those stairs, I thought about what it would take, how that balance transfer would be, where my center of balance needed to be in order to do that. And I said, I'm always thinking about solving the next problem. You know, looking at the curbs. How did I get up a curb? Solving that problem. And going upstairs is just like going up a bunch of curbs. You get your balance and you go. So after just a few short months, normally it takes about 6 to 8 months to rehab out of there. I was done in about 4. And they said, okay, we're going to give you a discharge. And that was it. I now walk without a cane. I move around very well in my prosthetics. One of the things I first noticed when I got my first loan repair is kids looking at the legs. And you could see the curiosity in their eyes. And a lot of times the parents would say, oh, no, don't stare. And I thought, I'm going to break things up. So my legs always have a Batman logo on the side of them. I don't know if Nancy shared that with you. There was a news clip that I did with Global TV regarding positive attitudes in recovery. And so I always have a Batman logo on my legs. And it's true, the kids will stare and come up and ask about the legs, and absolutely love that, because it's yep, this is what happened. I lost my legs and there's nothing for you to worry about. And as you can see, here I am getting around on them. And so it's been an amazing journey. I've been supported by my family and friends. I've had one of the things as a former police officer, I did a lot of work and training. I trained a lot of people. I brought a lot of interesting new technology into the department. And so I knew a lot of people, and I had a constant, I never knew who was coming through the door next. I had friends fly out from San Antonio, Texas to say hi. I had police officers on duty, which startled the nursing staff a little bit, because they wondered why all these uniformed police officers were looking me up and coming into my room to see me. And eventually they all learned that I was a former police officer. And so it's that positive attitude that kept me going. It still keeps me going. I've just started out to the driving range now and doing golf again. And so my next step in that is actually getting out and doing a full game of golf. Once I've got my balance down and I'm hitting the ball right with the legs and feeling how it is now, it's different. Making sure I get the turn in, up in the toe, all that good stuff. And every day I get up with purpose. I get my coffee, which is just safer for everybody if I've had my first cup of coffee. I had a guy take himself hostage once before I'd had my first cup. It did not go well for him. So start with my coffee. I look at the day ahead and think, what little piece of the puzzle am I going to pull off today and place into the big puzzle? And that's my story.
Does anybody have any questions or comments? Bree says, thank you. You're such an inspiration.
Well, thank you, Bree. I appreciate that. I hear that, but I often think that there are many, many people out there who are inspirational, but they don't talk about what they've been through. And I think we need to talk more. I think I think we all have stuff. As a police officer, I saw that. Everybody's got stuff. And finding out and dealing with that stuff is my adoption stuff isn't horrible. My family, the family that adopted me, amazing. Like their support through all of this was just unbelievable. And so at the end of the day, it's finding your stuff to deal with and then walking out the other side. Because it's scary going into therapy and stuff like that, because everybody thinks, oh my God, what's going to happen? But only good things come from it.
Certainly, that's a big part of why I find it important to organize human library sessions is it does feel like, well, first of all, everybody does have a story, and everybody's story is valid. It's their lived experience. But I find, we have these rules in culture that says, oh, you're not supposed to talk to people in certain situations. You're not supposed to bring it up. They're going to find it upsetting. And I don't believe that, I guess.
No.
If we don't share the struggles, how can we authentically share anything else, I think. So it does take some courage, I guess, to speak in some contexts, but hopefully this is comfortable for you, obviously.
Oh, absolutely. And the funny thing is there's always the stereotype of the cops that won't talk. Well, let me tell you, all the cops I knew, we'd sit around at coffee, some of the best therapy sessions on the planet. It's a place to rant. It's a place to vent. Always a safe place, and a lot of good came from that. And it's really a changed environment within. It's no longer the you must suffer in silence. There are more things available for police officers to get mental health help, PTSD help. And every time there's, unfortunately, one of our brothers or sisters takes their own life, everybody gets in we need to do more. No. What we have to accept sometimes is that bad shit happens. Life happens. Not all things can be fixed. Not all things sometimes you can't reach some people.
Yeah.
And
what's the point of blaming a person at that point?
and getting away from the blame game. I mean, when I go to a suicide and attended suicides on the job, the biggest question was, well, they were doing so well and everything was great and we had no clue. Yeah, because they made up their mind a while ago and it gave them peace. You aren't going to pick up on that because they're not telling you. So you didn't miss anything. There's nothing you could do. You do your bit. You act on what your instincts tell you to do. You let them know you're there for support. If they are in the space where they can take it, they will. And that's why, like you said, talking is so important, because you might pick up that little thread of something that other people might not notice. And just going for coffee with people. Coffee has on occasion saved my life. And that's why coffee is so important, is because it gives people that connection.
Yep. Yeah.
And it saves me from going really weird.
So when you started the process with your prosthetics,
yes.
Did you start with both feet at once?
Yep. The very first day they came in there, they fitted both my legs. Now, so it was about 6 weeks after the amputations, they took the stitches out, and they said, I guess we're ready to go, which was kind of early for them. But they brought in both legs and they put them on. They wheeled me up to the parallel bars there, and I stood up and took a few steps. The very first time with the wheelchair in behind me. And my mom and dad were there, and I'll never forget watching my mom and dad tear up. And everybody who came in to see that process, because it takes a while. So my brothers, different brothers and sisters, friends of mine would come in, and they'd watch me take those first few steps and just amazed by it.
Yeah.
And to me, it's just, this is what I got to do.
Yeah.
So now I get up in the morning, I'll wheelchair out, grab a cup of coffee, wheelchair back into my room, put my legs on, and that's it for the rest of the day.
So if you had had infection in one of them and they had to do amputation higher up,
Yep.
would they have done both legs so that your prosthetics would kind of be balanced? Because otherwise you're bending, or you're moving from the hips more in one situation maybe, and your knees more active in the other?
No, I think they would, well, the knee would be more active on the one leg. They're not going to take good flesh away, and having that knee articulation
Right.
is really good. So they would have just put the different prosthetic for the, now that would have been cool, because a buddy of mine, they asked me he got his leg sheared off in a hiking accident in Moab, Utah, and brought back, and he had originally below knee amputations, and that exactly happened to him, where they had to do an above knee amputation on his right leg. So his knee is controlled by his iPhone. So it controls the friction and how much so he can do different things. And I thought, well, that's a bit of a ripoff. I got no tech. Like, seriously.
Yeah.
So had I had the amputations higher, yes, they would have left the one amputation where it is, because that would have been good for balance. And the way they would they make sure your legs balance your hips, and they've got computers that look at it and graph it, and it's just amazing what they do.
You experience that phantom sensation?
Good point. I know a lot of people that phantom pain can get out of control for them. And so I was on a drug called Lyrica for diabetic neuropathy in my hands and feet, even before I lost my legs. And so they were giving me my medications, and I said, "Is Lyrica in here?" Because I was on that before. They said no, and I said, "Put me back on that," because it was for nerve pain. And my theory was that it would control the phantom pains, and sure enough, I was never ever, after the amputations and after I quickly weaned off the medication, but I was never ever above a pain level 2 out of 10 on my legs and the amputation. So it was amazing. But yes, I'll be sitting here and all of a sudden my big toe will itch on the right leg. And so all I do is tap my left leg, and it goes away, because it tells the body, "Hey, psst, you got nothing. Get back over here." So it's a simple matter of tapping the opposite leg, and my left instep will get an itch, my right big toe, and sometimes my right heel.
Interesting. Well, you could write a little app for your phone, and it could say like itch right heel, and you could impress people like, "Look at this, I'm scratching my right heel." Oh, that's so much better.
That would be a cool app.
It's doing nothing, but you can then you would get the tech.
Yeah, and I'm afraid people look at you funny in the coffee shop.
Fair enough.
Doing that to your phone.
Yeah.
It'd be a little weird.
Yeah. We have a question here. Back to the adoption part of your story. The fact that you named your son Kyle, that gave me chills. Have you now visited Kyle in Saskatchewan, I guess? Have you visited Kyle, Saskatchewan? And are there still family there?
No, there's no more family in Kyle. And my understanding is the lady that helped, what happened there too is, so I figured, okay, I'll phone the high school. So I called the high school to see if they had yearbooks from 63 to 65, being that she was a teenager. And they said, nope, don't have them. Call the town hall. So I called the town hall. Nope, don't got them. And I said, oh, okay. I'm about to hang up when this question pops into my head. Do you have anybody working there that might have been around at that time? And they said, oh yeah, Mabel. I won't give her last name. So they put Mabel on the phone, and that's where I got the names of the 3 sisters. She knew them.
Wow.
And So yeah, from then on, it was just go, go, go. So I haven't been back to Kyle. It's on my bucket list of things to do.
You should have a reunion of sorts there.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I could bring everybody from all over the place.
We have a comment here from Marianne. Thank you very much for sharing your story. Very inspiring. I have a question around your adoption story as well. Do you think that connecting with your birth family earlier would have made things easier? I ask specifically because my children are adopted and I've always shared as much as I can with them, but I wonder how much to pursue trying to connect them with birth family, or if I should wait until they initiate it and then I support them in the ways that I can.
Wait till they're ready to go find them. It was the exact same way with me. I needed to go through my process before I knew that I needed to go. And it's about giving yourself that permission to go search. Sure. It's not about the finding. It's about giving yourself that authorization that, okay, I can go do this.
And you're able to be comfortable in that process and that decision because you've known and you've been able to process in your
Yep.
way, in your time. And you know, your parents aren't going to be mad if you decide, if your adoptive parents are not going to be mad or disappointed or anything when you choose to make that that decision to find your birth parents.
Well, and I go back to my dad telling me that they had this information and asking me if I wanted to go. Well, no, he didn't tell me he had the information. In fact, they had a letter written for me in their will on the safe deposit box to explain all this. And it's funny because as much as he asked me if I wanted to go look, I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
So, and as a mother, you will know your children. You can offer that to them and say, hey, do you want to do this? But it's really about coming to that point where you give yourself permission to go look. You need that strength and that conviction to go do that.
Yeah, that's some stuff to think about probably, Marianne, in terms of language, even to talk to the kids.
Marianne, there's a book that helped me, and it's called Adoption Healing, and it explains all sides of this story. So I would highly recommend picking up a copy of Adoption Healing, an amazing book for adopted people, for adoptive parents, birth parents. It just really puts it all into a great perspective.
How do you prepare the child? Oh, sorry.
And it's funny, but yes, there's actually a book, not just a human book, but an actual book that really changed the course of my life.
How do you prepare the child for the possibility that the parents don't want a relationship?
I think when you explain to the kids that they are loved, respected, and cared for by you, and the search is about finding out where they belong, or where they grew up, or where their parents were. It's about finding a part of their story.
Yeah.
But if the parents don't want a relationship, it doesn't change the story. Sometimes it's better. So, you know, your kids will need to understand the concept of rejection, of hurt. And it's not about the finding. It's about giving yourself permission to search, about giving yourself permission to go look.
Yeah. And there must be a little bit of an aspect of, in the same way that the parents or the mother at that time in their life put the child up for adoption, most likely so that the child would have a better life.
Yes.
There's the possibility if the person then phones their birth mother or parents, you know, later in life, it seems to me that there is the possibility that if the person says, I don't want to have a relationship, that, oh, I kind of lost my train of thought. Carry on amongst yourselves.
Well, and it's interesting because I found my birth mom, and she never changed her name, her last name, in case I came looking for her. But the true fact of the matter is she suffers from so much guilt over it that she kind of cut off the relationship with me. Now, funny thing is, I'm connected to all my brothers and sisters, but her and I haven't talked in a few years.
Right. It's a lot
Do
to
I feel?
reconcile.
Yeah, absolutely. And do I feel rejected? Absolutely not. I get it.
Yeah.
People have their own story. There's an amazing book. I'll give another book shout out here to The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. It is a little book, but if you adopt what he's talking about, the four agreements are never make assumptions, always do your best, be impeccable with your word, and never take things personally. And if you can adopt those four mandates, it changes your world. Like, we all take things personally, hurts, relationships, things like that. It's not about us. It's about that person's story, not about what we're going through. We have nothing to do with it. My scope and control ends about 6 inches from, well, where my toes used to be, but from my fake toes. And that's the scope and control of my world. I can't control people.
Yeah.
And once you get that understanding of things and don't stop taking things personally, you can deal with those because it's not about me, it's about what's going on with that person, or in this case, my mom. And so I'm not feeling rejected. I don't feel pain or anguish over that.
And that's exactly where I was going when I lost my train of thought, was in the same way that the mother would have given the baby up so that the baby had the best life. As you become mature enough to understand the process of seeking your birth mother or parents, that if there is rejection from either or both of them to you, it might be because they have to do it for what's best for them at that point.
Absolutely. And you learn lessons when you're supposed to learn them.
Janice says, thanks for an inspiring story. What do you think contributed to your positive thinking? It seems like a tall order.
Well, I think the groundwork for that was my mom and dad. I was constantly challenged to do things like paper routes and jobs and tasks around the house. And so I was given these things to do. And so I was very resilient and very capable of accepting those challenges. But when you see, as a police officer, you see more death, mayhem, and carnage than anything. In July of 2001, a month after I'd been married, my partner and I were in a foot chase outside the Denny's on McLeod Trail. And the guy tried to get inside the Denny's, ran around the corner, we're 10 feet behind him, and 2 shots rang out. My partner's behind a truck, I'm behind some paper bins, I draw my gun, his gun is out. I'm thinking my partner shot this guy because he's now down on the ground bleeding. My partner's thinking I shot the guy. So I look at him, I go, well, Dave, somebody shot this guy. So now we're looking in the parking lot to see if somebody is shooting at us and got him in the crossfire. So as we moved up, I put my toe under his shoulder and lifted it up, and there was a gun in his hand with the finger on the trigger. And I said, no, Dave, this guy shot himself. So we saw him turning, and he was carrying the gun here under on his chest. So as he turned to shoot us, your minor muscles react to the big muscles. And so as he turned to shoot us, he shot himself and went down. So that point in my career, I learned one very important perspective. Life and death matters. Everything else will sort out later. People get too excited about and too over the top about minor stuff that in the scope of life. And, you know, you see people that lose loved ones. I was very good at going into families and letting them know that somebody they loved had died. And I looked at that. I've been there and held people's hands as they were passing away, knowing they were going. And I found that to be a great honor, to be there with someone as they crossed over. And so it's looking at those positives in the worst negative times and always doing your best, because that domestic violence call, you don't want to go there again. You don't know if the next time you go there, somebody's going to be dead. So you always made sure you did your best. And that's where that positive attitude really came through and developed in doing the police work.
Do you do any training with the police now? I mean, obviously attitude, outlook would be an important one to have lots of conversations about as police officers, but also about your adjustment to a new body state. And even just as police officers, then how do you communicate with and approach people who might have different mobility, and so therefore have a different reaction to presence of police or that kind of thing?
Well, it's fun. I don't do it formally, but I have been approached on a couple of occasions where one police officer I know, well, I didn't know him at the time, but I was asked to go talk to him, and we've had some chats. He developed H1N1 at the beginning of March, and as a result of that, had his left leg amputated below the knee and his right leg amputated above the knee. So he is currently working through the same issues I was a few years ago. So I send a letter of support and encouragement every now and then. I'm not going to bust in the barn door, as it were. And I'm still very much attached to the police. I sit on the Calgary Police Rodeo Committee. So I'm still attached to working police officers, guys that are in homicide, guys that are in the tactical teams. And I'll tell you that those conversations are going on. They've been going on for years. This is not new stuff. They do community engagements. They have all sorts of courses for renewing and talking about dealing with the things you see on the job, all sorts of stuff, all sorts of people doing that. So if they ever ask me, and I have a feeling I'm going to be included in a course coming up, absolutely I talk to them, and my message is simple: have a positive attitude. You already have that attitude. It will get you through.
It's a great message. Does anybody have any final questions or comments, or put on your cameras and wave goodbye? Oh, this hour has passed so quickly. Thank you again, Ward, for sharing your story and your positive outlook on life, no matter the challenges. Wishing you all the best. And Betty says, thank you for sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you all for listening. It's been a pleasure. I always look at these opportunities as an ability to share. And I hope that somebody pulled something from what I had to say today. I hope it helped you in some way, shape, or form. I hope it touched your life, or you might be talking to somebody tomorrow or next week, and you're going to go, hey, wait a minute. And you have that aha moment. Because one of my favorite sayings is, life must be lived forwards, but understood backwards. Stay in the moment, appreciate your life, appreciate your family, and thank you very much for listening to me jabber on for the last hour.